The locked room. It was a fresh start for Sarah. After years of living in cramped apartments and dealing with noisy neighbors, she had finally found her dream home, a charming old Victorian house at the edge of town. It was larger than she needed, but something about the place had spoken to her when she first saw it. The high ceilings, the ornate wooden staircase, and the stained glass windows gave it an air of history and mystery. For a woman who had always loved a good story, it seemed like the perfect setting for the next chapter of her life. But the house had one quirk. A single room on the second floor was locked. The real estate agent had been vague about it, brushing off Sarah's questions with a nonchalant, "Oh, it's just storage. The previous owners lost the key." At first, Sarah didn't think much of it. The house was beautiful and the price had been a steal. What was one locked room compared to the sprawling space she now owned? She decided she'd deal with it later, once she'd settled in. The first night, Sarah's first night in the house, was quiet. Too quiet. She had always lived in busy urban areas where the sounds of traffic and the hum of life served as a constant backdrop. Here, the silence pressed against her like a living thing. Every creak of the floorboards and groan of the old pipes set her nerves on edge. As she lay in bed, staring at the dark ceiling, she heard for the first time a faint, rhythmic sound coming from upstairs. Tap, tap, tap. It was soft, almost imperceptible, but unmistakable. It seemed to be coming from the direction of the locked room. Sarah sat up, her heart pounding. She told herself it was just the house settling. Old houses made noises, didn't they? But the sound continued, steady and deliberate. Gathering her courage, she grabbed a flashlight and headed upstairs. The hallway was cold, far colder than the rest of the house. The locked door loomed at the end of the corridor, its dark wood polished to an unnatural sheen. As Sarah approached, the tapping stopped. She stood in front of the door, her hand hovering over the doorknob. "Hello?" she whispered, feeling foolish. Silence. She tried the knob, even though she knew it wouldn't turn. The door was solid, unyielding. Shaking her head, she returned to her bedroom, convincing herself it was her imagination. The discoveries. Over the next few days, Sarah became obsessed with the locked room. She searched the house for a key, going through every drawer, cabinet, and crevice. She even checked the basement, which was damp and filled with cobwebs, but found nothing. Her curiosity turned into frustration. Who locked a room and left it that way? And why? One afternoon, while dusting the bookshelf in the living room, she found a small leather-bound journal tucked behind a row of old novels. The handwriting inside was neat but faded, and the entries were dated from over 50 years ago. The journal belonged to a woman named Eleanor, who had once lived in the house. Most of the entries were mundane, detailing daily chores and social visits. But as Sarah flipped through the pages, one entry caught her eye. March 12, 1972. "The noises are back. Always at night, always from the nursery. Harold says I'm imagining things, but I know what I heard. The tapping, the whispers. It's her. It has to be her." Sarah's hands trembled as she turned the page. March 15, 1972. "I told Harold we need to leave, but he refuses. He's too proud to abandon the house. I've locked the door and hidden the key. It's the only way to keep her in. I pray it's enough." Sarah's blood ran cold. Her? Who was Eleanor talking about? And why had she felt the need to lock someone or something inside that room? The key fueled by equal parts fear and determination, Sarah scoured the house again, this time looking specifically for the hidden key. Days passed with no success, and the nightly tapping grew louder. It was no longer soft and rhythmic. It was frantic as though something on the other side of the door was desperate to get out. One evening, while rearranging furniture in her bedroom, Sarah noticed a loose floorboard near the window. Her heart raced as she pried it up, revealing a small metal box. Inside was an ornate brass key, tarnished with age. She knew she should leave it alone. Every instinct screamed at her to walk away, to forget about the locked room and whatever secrets it held. But curiosity and a strange, almost magnetic pull drove her forward. The room, with trembling hands, Sarah inserted the key into the lock. It turned with a loud click, and the door creaked open. The room was a nursery, just as Eleanor had described in her journal. Dusty toys were scattered across the floor, and a crib stood in the corner, draped with tattered fabric. The air was heavy, oppressive, and carried a faint, sweet scent of decay. As Sarah stepped inside, she felt a sudden drop in temperature. Her breath came out in visible puffs, and the shadows in the room seemed to shift and dance. Then she saw it, a figure standing by the window, its back turned to her. It was a woman, her long dark hair cascading over a tattered white dress. "Hello?" Sarah's voice cracked. The figure turned slowly. Its face was pale and hollow, with empty, black eyes that seemed to bore into Sarah's soul. A twisted smile spread across its lips. "You shouldn't have opened the door," it whispered. The aftermath. Sarah doesn't remember running out of the room. The next thing she knew, she was outside, standing in the driveway, her hands shaking uncontrollably. The house loomed behind her, its windows dark and uninviting. She didn't go back inside that night. Instead, she drove to a motel and stayed there, trying to convince herself it had all been a hallucination. But deep down, she knew better. The next day, she returned with a locksmith and had the door sealed shut. She didn't care what was inside. She just wanted it contained. But the house never felt the same. The tapping continued, louder and more insistent, until Sarah couldn't take it anymore. She sold the house a month later, leaving behind the locked room and its sinister occupant. And somewhere, in the darkness of the nursery, the tapping continued. The Whispering Walls. Emma had always been drawn to old houses. There was something captivating about the history embedded in their walls, the lives they had seen, the stories they silently held. So, when she stumbled upon an abandoned Victorian house during her weekend drive, she couldn't resist taking a closer look. The house sat at the edge of a dense forest, shrouded in mist. Its once vibrant facade was now faded and peeling, and the windows, with their intricate frames, gazed out like the hollow eyes of a ghost. A for sale sign stood crookedly in the overgrown lawn, barely visible through the weeds. Emma didn't hesitate. She called the number on the sign that same day, and within weeks the house was hers. She envisioned restoring it to its former glory, turning it into the kind of home she had always dreamed of. But as she soon discovered, the house had dreams of its own. Moving in. The first few days were uneventful. Emma spent her time cleaning, unpacking, and marveling at the craftsmanship of the old structure. Ornate wooden moldings, stained glass windows, and a grand staircase that spiraled up into darkness. The house was a masterpiece, albeit a neglected one. But it wasn't long before she began to notice oddities. It started with whispers. At first, she thought it was the wind slipping through cracks in the walls, a natural sound in an old house. But the whispers were too distinct, too deliberate. Late at night as she lay in bed, she could hear them clearly, hushed voices murmuring just beyond her understanding. Sometimes it sounded like her name. Emma? She told herself it was her imagination, the product of loneliness in a big, empty house. But as the days turned into weeks, the whispers grew louder, more insistent. They seemed to follow her from room to room, fading when she turned on a light, only to resume as soon as darkness returned. The hidden door. One rainy afternoon, while exploring the house's attic, Emma discovered something unusual. Hidden behind a stack of rotting boxes was a small door, no more than 4 feet high. It was painted the same color as the wall, nearly invisible, and locked with a rusted latch. Curiosity got the better of her. She retrieved a crowbar from the garage and pried the door open. Behind it was a narrow passageway that led down a steep, spiraling staircase. The air was damp and cold, and the faint scent of mildew tickled her nose. At the bottom of the staircase was a room. It was small and bare, with walls made of rough stone. In the center of the room stood an old wooden table, and on it lay a single object, a leather-bound journal. Emma picked it up, her fingers trembling. The journal was brittle with age, its pages yellowed and filled with spidery handwriting. It belonged to someone named Margaret, who had lived in the house over a century ago. The entry started innocently enough, detailing Margaret's daily life. But as Emma read on, the tone grew darker. Margaret spoke of voices in the walls, whispered seemed to know her every thought. She wrote of strange dreams and shadows that moved on their own. The final entry sent a chill down Emma's spine. February 14th, 1903. The voices won't stop. They say I belong to them now. I hear them even when I cover my ears. I can't take it anymore. If anyone finds this journal, leave this house. Burn it if you must. The walls are alive and they are hungry. The Descent. After reading the journal, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. The whispers grew louder and more coherent, forming sentences she could almost understand. At night, she dreamt of faces emerging from the walls, their mouths open in silent screams. She tried to ignore it, to focus on her renovation work, but the house resisted her efforts. Tools disappeared, paint cans tipped over, and doors she had left open were inexplicably locked. It was as if the house itself was fighting her. One evening, as she was preparing to go to bed, she heard a loud thud from the living room. She rushed downstairs to find that a section of wallpaper had peeled away, revealing the bare wall beneath. To her horror, the plaster was covered in scratches, as though someone had clawed at it desperately. She leaned in closer, her heart racing. Among the scratches were words, faint but legible. Help us. Confrontation. Emma decided she needed answers. She returned to the hidden room in the basement, hoping to find something she had missed. This time, she noticed a loose stone in the wall. With great effort, she pried it free, revealing a small cavity. Inside was a bundle wrapped in cloth. She unwrapped it to find a collection of old photographs and letters. The photographs showed a family, a man, a woman, and 2 children, standing in front of the house. They looked happy, but their eyes held a certain sadness, as though they knew their fate. The letters were more revealing. They spoke of strange occurrences, of a malevolent presence within the house. One letter, written by the man, described how his wife had begun hearing voices and seeing things that weren't there. She had become obsessed with the walls, claiming they were alive. The final letter was a single sentence. The house won. The truth, Emma's breaking point came one night when she woke to find the whispers louder than ever. They weren't just coming from the walls anymore. They were inside her head. Emma, join us. The room grew colder, and the air seemed to thicken. Shadows stretched and twisted, forming shapes that shouldn't have been possible. The walls began to pulse, as though they were breathing. In a panic, Emma grabbed a can of gasoline from the garage and began pouring it along the floors and walls. The whispers turned into screams, pleading with her to stop, but she was beyond reason. She struck a match and threw it onto the gasoline-soaked floor. Flames roared to life, consuming the house with terrifying speed. Emma ran outside, collapsing on the lawn as the fire engulfed the old structure. For a moment, she thought she heard screams coming from within the flames, but she told herself it was the wind. The house burned to the ground, leaving nothing but ash and rubble. The aftermath. Emma moved away, trying to put the experience behind her. But she could never escape the feeling that she had left a part of herself behind in that house. The whispers still haunted her dreams, and sometimes, late at night, she thought she could hear them faintly, calling her name. And somewhere, in the charred remains of the house, the walls still whispered, waiting for their next victim. The haunted painting. For as long as she could remember, Olivia had been fascinated by art. A budding artist herself, she spent her days painting landscapes and portraits, dreaming of one day opening her own gallery. So when she stumbled upon an old art shop tucked into a quiet corner of the city, she couldn't resist stepping inside. The shop was a treasure trove of forgotten masterpieces, its dimly lit interior filled with canvases stacked against the walls and shelves lined with antique frames. But one painting in particular caught Olivia's eye. It was a large, ornate canvas depicting a grand manor surrounded by a dark, twisted forest. The colors were muted, yet the scene felt alive, almost as if it were watching her. "That one's an odd piece," said the shopkeeper, an elderly man with a faraway look in his eyes. "Been here longer than I have. Most people don't like the feel of it." "I'll take it," Olivia said without hesitation. Something about the painting spoke to her, though she couldn't quite explain why. The arrival. Olivia brought the painting home and hung it in her studio. Its presence was commanding, dominating the room despite the other works surrounding it. She spent hours staring at it, tracing the intricate details of the manor and the forest, marveling at the artist's skill. But it didn't take long for her to notice the changes. At first, they were subtle. The shadows in the painting seemed darker at night, the forest more foreboding. The manor's windows, once empty, now seemed to glint with a faint, flickering light. Olivia dismissed it as a trick of her imagination, a byproduct of her overactive mind. But then the changes became undeniable. The first night. It happened late one night as Olivia worked on a new piece. The room was silent, save for the soft scratching of her brush against the canvas. She glanced up at the painting and froze. A figure stood in one of the manor's windows, its silhouette stark against the dimly lit interior. Her breath caught in her throat. She blinked, and the figure was gone. Shaking her head, she told herself it was nothing, just her tired eyes playing tricks on her. But deep down, she knew something was wrong. That night, she dreamt of the painting. In her dream, she stood before the manor, its towering facade looming over her. The forest whispered around her, its trees twisting and creaking as if alive. She felt a presence behind her, cold and unyielding, but when she turned, there was nothing there. The discovery. Over the next few days, Olivia's unease grew. The painting continued to change, its details shifting subtly yet unmistakably. The forest seemed to encroach on the manor, its gnarled branches reaching closer and closer. And always there was the faint glint of light in the windows, as though something inside was watching. Desperate for answers, Olivia researched the painting. She scoured online forums and art history books, but found nothing. It was as if the painting didn't exist. Frustrated, she returned to the shop where she had bought it. The shopkeeper looked uneasy when she mentioned the painting. "I told you it was an odd piece," he said. "Came to us years ago. Don't know who painted it, but everyone who's owned it says the same thing. Strange things happen. Like what? Olivia demanded. The shopkeeper hesitated. Voices, shadows, dreams that feel too real. Most people get rid of it after a while. The voices that night, Olivia heard them for the first time. She had just drifted off to sleep when a faint whisper pulled her back to consciousness. It was soft at first, like the rustle of leaves in the wind. But as she lay there, frozen in her bed, the whispers grew louder, forming words she couldn't quite understand. She sat up, her heart pounding, and looked toward her studio. The door was ajar, and beyond it, she could see the painting. The glinting light in the manor's windows was brighter now, almost beckoning. "Who's there?" she called, her voice trembling. The whispers stopped. The room was silent, oppressive. Gathering her courage, Olivia got out of bed and approached the painting. As she stood before it, the air grew cold and a shadow passed across the canvas. For a moment she thought she saw the figure again, standing at the edge of the forest, watching her. The truth determined to understand the painting's origins, Olivia reached out to an art historian she knew, Dr. Evelyn Carter. Evelyn was intrigued by Olivia's description and agreed to come see the painting in person. When Evelyn arrived, her reaction was immediate. This is unlike anything I've ever seen," she said, studying the painting closely. "The style is reminiscent of late 19th century Gothic art, but there's something else here. It's almost alive." Evelyn ran her fingers along the frame, pausing at a small inscription Olivia hadn't noticed before. The words were faint, etched into the wood. "Beware the Watcher." "What does it mean?" Olivia asked. Evelyn's face was pale. "I'm not sure, but this painting, it's not just art. It's a window, a connection to something other. The descent." The whispers grew more persistent, their words clearer now. They spoke of the Watcher, of the forest, of a hunger that could not be sated. Olivia's dreams became nightmares, vivid and terrifying. She saw herself walking through the forest, the trees closing in around her. The manor's door would open, and she'd feel the Watcher's gaze upon her. One night, she woke to find herself standing in front of the painting, her hand pressed against the canvas. The surface felt cold, almost wet, and as she pulled her hand away, she saw a faint outline of her palm on the forest's edge. She realized then that the painting wasn't just changing, it was consuming her. The final stand. In a desperate attempt to rid herself of the painting, Olivia decided to destroy it. She dragged it out into her backyard, doused it in gasoline, and struck a match. The flames roared to life, engulfing the canvas. For a moment, she felt relief, but then she heard it, a scream, low and guttural, emanating from the fire. The flames flickered unnaturally, and the air around her grew cold. She stumbled back, watching in horror as the painting resisted the fire, the image on the canvas shifting and twisting. When the flames finally died, the painting lay charred but intact. The forest was darker now, the manor's windows ablaze with light, and standing at the edge of the forest was the Watcher, its face obscured but its presence undeniable. The aftermath. Olivia moved out of her house the next day, leaving the painting behind. But it wasn't over. Wherever she went, she could feel it watching her. Reflections in mirrors, shadows in corners, whispers in the dead of night. The Watcher was always there. And somewhere in the darkness of her abandoned studio, the painting waited, its forest growing ever closer, its manor ever brighter, its Watcher ever hungrier.